Hello, my name's Jade and today I'm going to be discussing the books I read in September. I read 5 books in September, 4 novels and 1 non-fiction, and a lot of fantasy. I've really been getting back into fantasy. The first book I finished in September was The Atlas Complex by Olivia Blake. This is the last book in the Atlas trilogy, I think that's what it's called. I read the second book earlier this year. I'll leave the video where I discuss it down below in the description, and I'll also leave the video where I talk about the first one down below if you want to hear more of what this trilogy is about. Being that this is the third book, there's not a ton that I can say. We're following Medeans, who basically like magic wielders, and it's about a secret society and corruption, but it's very much a more literary feeling series. Very much about the conversations they're having and the characters as opposed to what's going on. I feel conflicted about this one. The first one was so exciting and I had such a cool vision of where the series could go, and it went in a very different direction to what I expected it. The second two, the Atlas Paradox and the Atlas Complex, both felt a little bit lackluster to me. They both opened with these really exciting premises, with these really like interesting things happening, these like intense things that we have to figure out, and then the intensity of it just like completely fell to the wayside both times, and we just ended up spending a lot of time with our characters talking and theorizing and talking about these like big philosophical and like scientific theories and stuff, which I just kind of got bored by, especially in the second book. But then even then, books 1 and 2 both had these really explosive, exciting endings that really pulled it up for me. And this one, it just... Here's the thing. The characters are entertaining and endearing and I'm obsessed with them. The world is really rich, really immersive. The writing has these immaculate vibes and it's got such character and personality to it. It's so well done. It feels kind of pompous, but that's not the word I'm thinking of. Hopefully it's on the screen. But that so matches the vibes and like what it's trying to do, I think. And it has this really fun mix of being really elegant and sophisticated, yet also like dipping into the characters' minds and being really comedic. It's really charming, it's really well done. The plot though, they're definitely a literary leaning novel of ideas kinds of feeling, and in the acknowledgements of this one, Olivia talks about what she was trying to do, where she was coming from with these. And I get that, and I do think it's kind of clever, and Jenna, her Goodreads review, really goes in depth into this about how these books are kind of doing what they emulate, and part of me like that's part of the reason why they feel anticlimactic, is trying to do that because of the message it's trying to get across. It's very much kind of like reflecting the world back at us in this really dark way, I think. Did it need to be as intense and as like depressing as it was? I don't know. Is there like no hope in the world? And there is some hope. Like, I don't want to say like it's completely dreary, like it does strike the balance, but I think it could have struck a better balance personally. This book really hurt me. It really hurt. There was like this one thing in my head and I was like, as long as this thing happens, everything will be okay. I'm not gonna say whether that thing happened or not because I don't want to get too close into the realm of spoilers, but you can see how upset I'm getting just thinking about it. The reviews of this one on Goodreads are fascinating to read. There's a lot of 1 stars. A lot of people find it really boring, really hard to get through, which I can see. I think the pacing of both of the second two, like there was definitely a lull for me like in the middle, both of them. But then when I was enjoying it, like when it was good, it was so good. But there's this one review in particular that just gets me every time. This is exactly how I feel, to be honest. So yeah, I'm conflicted, obviously. I think they're so well, for the most part, so well executed. They have such an interesting idea behind them. The characters are really well thought out, the world's really well thought. Well, the world can actually be a bit murky at times. It doesn't matter. And the vibes are so well done, and that's what's important. And some of the stuff they talk about is interesting. The relationships in here is really like what pulled me through. Like these second 2 books. The first one, like the intrigue had me, but as the intrigue pulled away, and I do think I like the way the intrigue was really pulled away in this one. Just it left me then with not so much to like grip onto, but the lack of plot, like that's what I keep circling back to talking about it. So obviously it really like bothered me. On the one hand I'm like, it's meta, and at the same time like, at what cost? How meta can art be before it gets to the point where the artist is just trying to like shout at you and like you're not enjoying the experience? Like if you're not enjoying the experience, the art is to be enjoyed at the end of the day. So I kind of wish it was done more subtly, and we could have, because it felt like it was going to be a big adventure at the end of the first book, and it just really wasn't quite that. And I predicted a couple of things that happened in here, and then that left like me with a big anticlimactic feeling. So at this point in time, I'm gonna give it a 7 out of 10 because I don't know. I really truly don't. I want to love it. I so want to love this series with my whole heart, but there's just that, like, it's left a weird taste in my mouth. Like, it's kind of sour and bitter. It's not necessarily altogether bad. Like, I get why, but it's weird and kind of upsetting all the same. I don't think I feel as disappointed now as when I first finished it. I was really disappointed. But at the same time, I love the characters so much. And like I said, when it's good, it's so good. 7 out of 10. That's all I can say. If you've read any of these books, please let me know what your thoughts are in the comments. I'm so interested. Next up, we have book 2 in a different trilogy, and that is The Kingdom of Copper by S.A. Chakraborty. I audiobooked this one, narrated by Sunila Nankani. This is book 2 in the David Bad trilogy, which is a YA fantasy trilogy that came out a while ago. I read the first book, I think like a month or 2 ago. I'll leave the video where I discuss it down below. We're dealing with like Jinn. It takes place in like the Middle East kind of, and it's really fun. Again, one of the big things that pulled me through this trilogy was the characters, and in this one I think they really shone. They were really complicated. Like Nari's relationship with Muntadir in this one I found so interesting. Like Muntadir in this one, just in general, I was like flopping like a fish in terms of like what I thought. But like he had some really great moments and he had some really horrible moments, and I could understand where he was coming from though. Jamshid was really, like, they were all just really complicated, fascinating to watch. Dara, ugh. Don't get me started on Dara. He's my favourite. By the end of this one, I was kind of like upset that it was only a trilogy. Like in my mind, I could really envision it being like a bigger, grander series. Spoiler, I also read the last book this month, so we're gonna get to that. But I don't know if I quite feel that now. Like I was satisfied. Not that like if it was longer I'd be upset. Like I wouldn't be upset. I do like these characters, but like I am satisfied, I think, with the overall arc, more or less. They're more political fantasy than they are like adventure. The first one and the last one have the most, this one has the least, and yet I feel like this might be my favourite of the trilogy. Another thing with this trilogy that I really love is where you're jumping around from different characters. You're going between Nari, Ali and Dara. Dara is this ancient jinn, he's a protector character. Ali is a prince, and the ruling family aren't the most beloved, we'll say. And then Nari is a healer, she's the one that's new to this world. They all have very different perspectives and they're all in their own kind of little circles-ish, especially Dara, he's like removed in this one. They have different pieces of the puzzle, so knowing what Dara knows was so stressful at times. Like I vividly remember there was one point where I wasn't even like, I was halfway through a chapter, I was listening to it on the bus, I stopped it when I got off the bus, and then I couldn't bring myself to start listening to it again on the bus ride home. I was like, no. I needed a minute to process what was happening. I was so stressed, but like in the best way. I don't know, I just thought it was really fun. I don't think it's the strongest like YA fantasy world or trilogy or anything like that I've ever read, but I had a really fun time, and especially with this one. So I'm gonna give this one, I think, also a 7 out of 10, but it's a very different 7 out of 10, I think, than what I gave. The Atlas Complex is like, I feel like you should be a 9, but you're just a 7, whereas this is like a fun 7 out of 10. That one like almost could have been an adult as well. Like there were a lot of F-bombs in there, and like it's one of those things where if there was just like a little bit like more sex and stuff like that, it could have been adult. I mean, it's a wide trilogy, it's fine, and I think that one was the most adult feeling, but it walked that line, and I do enjoy a YA fantasy that walks the line. I think Lani Taylor's books kind of walk the line where they don't feel like YA, whereas this one feels like YA, but it's just got a little bit more adult stuff happening. Like the characters are 25, like in their mid-20s. It really does feel like it started off YA and then it should have, I don't know. Next up, we have the non-fiction I read this month, and that is Feel Good Productivity, How to Do More of What Matters to You by Ali Abdaal. I listened to the audiobook of this one, it's narrated by the author, and I don't know how much I'd recommend it, to be honest, just because his tone sometimes kind of, like, he sounded bored. He sounded like he didn't want to be there. I do usually enjoy non-fiction when it's narrated by the author. It is a shorter book. I mean, you don't get all of like the cool pictures and stuff, although Ali does sometimes describe them. So this is kind of what it says on the tin. It's how to be productive, but in a way that genuinely is serving you and is feeling good and is something that is more sustainable. I mean, that's part of the reason why you want to feel good while you're being productive so that it is more sustainable. I've read a lot of like non-fiction about like personal growth this year. There is a video coming about that in December. But this one, interestingly enough, is one that kind of culminates a lot of information that I've been receiving from my various like personal growth books. You wouldn't expect it in a book like this, I don't think. I think you'd expect it in a more like spiritual or like mindful book. There actually is a lot of like kind of mindful-esque, like those kinds of practices in here. It's very practical, incredibly practical, and I really like the way he framed it, and it's like a series of experiments for you to conduct. Not all of it's going to work for you. Just take what does, leave what doesn't. It's like trial and error. And also like if something doesn't work for you, there's value in like that, you know, like that's not a failure because you've learned something now. It's just like it really takes the pressure off, which is kind of I guess the point. But I'm really excited to like conduct my own series of experiments to see what does work for me and what doesn't. I already have like some bets, but I want to like try all the different things so I can really thoroughly know, and I think it'd be fun. I really wish there was like a workbook that went alongside this though, where you could like fill in your own experiments. Like why haven't they released that? I need to be on their marketing team clearly. Yeah, I'd really recommend this one actually. I'm gonna give it a 7 out of 10 just because it wasn't the most enjoyable. And as of right now, like I can't exactly say it's life-changing, but maybe if I find it to be life-changing, I will change my mind later. Next up is The Serpent and the Wings of Night by Carissa Broadbent, the first book in the Crowns of Nyxia series. I think this is like a series of duologies, if I'm not mistaken. So this is set in a world with vampires, and I've never read like a fantasy vampire story. All the vampires I've read have been paranormal, unless they're like just like little pieces like in the Crescent City series or like the Cassandra Clare books, but like a fantasy series that's dedicated on vampires, and I loved it. If you have any recommendations for more like this, let me know. I used to love vampires as a kid, and it's been a while since I read like a good vampire book. Technically a romantasy. I don't know why I have so much beef with the term romantasy. We're following Aurea, who, by the way, I love the names in this book. Like the fancy names can be weird, but like they were really good in this one. Like I love Aurea. Kind of like the Hunger Games if there were vampires in like a political fantasy landscape. Aurea kind of enters into these vampire Hunger Games because the winner gets granted a wish. There is like political strife going on in the kingdom. Humans are like at the bottom of the food chain, they live in slums. Aurea is a human, but she was adopted by a king vampire. Why do I want to say High Lord? It's not High, he's a king. Like every time he said like man or like people, I was like, what do you mean? Don't you mean like vampires and males? Like Sarah J Maas has changed me. I listened to a little bit with this one as well, and I did really like the narrator. I did not look her up ahead of time. I completely forgot I audiobooked this one. I audiobooked a lot of books this month, clearly. I had a lot of fun with this one. Of the romance, to be fair, the only romance I've read in my mind is Iron Flame, Fourth Wing, because I don't count Sarah J Maas as romance. Like I could kind of see it with the Akatar series, but Crescent City and Throne of Glass, they're just fantasy with romance in them, okay? They're not romancy. I will die on this hill. To say it's not as nuanced as Fourth Wing, I don't think that's fair actually. I think I just had more fun in Fourth Wing and I felt much closer to it. But I still had a lot of fun with this one. I like can't stop thinking about it. I'm really excited to read book 2. I wrote on my Goodreads like the things I liked and the things I didn't like, and I'm just gonna go off that because I think that's the easiest way to summarize this. I really liked Aurea, our main character. I completely rooted for her. I completely understood everything she did. I don't think she like did any stupid rash decisions. Like everything she did felt thought out, and even if it was emotion led, you could see why she was doing what she was doing. I loved the romance. It was really slow burn. It was kind of like hate to love, but in a way that like made so much sense. Rain is our love interest, and I loved him a lot as well. I had the perfect amount of spice to it. I really liked, there's only a couple spicy scenes. We have gods in this fantasy world, and I love a fantasy world with gods. The gods is a real big part of the backstory. Really intrigued to see how it plays out, because I know who the second duology, like I know whose POV we're in, and I think that could be really interesting to see how like their interaction with the gods play out. It's a god that grants the wish at the end of the trial. It's basically like the god of the vampires, who's separate from like the rest of the gods, and she has this whole backstory, and the trials are emulating this backstory. Like they represent the backstory, there's meaning behind it, and our main character especially is really good at figuring that out. And so I thought that was all really interesting. Vincent, aka like Aurea's adopted father, Aurea and Vincent have a really interesting relationship. The more it goes on, the more you can kind of see what's going on here. To what extent Vincent knew what he was doing, I don't know. I think it's really murky. And even I think Aurea hasn't fully 100% realised the effects of what was happening. Like Rain has to kind of call her out on it at times, and I still think like we've like barely touched the surface there. So I really hope she continues to like unlearn things, but it came very obvious to me very early on, like, this is weird. I don't think I feel comfy with like the lessons he's teaching you, the things that you now believe because of him. But like, he is also a loving father, so it's such a fascinating dynamic. I really liked that aspect. I think it really added a lot of nuance to the story, and I hope that continues to be like a factor. And the ending, it got to a point, it's like, oh, okay, I know what's gonna happen. And yeah, but then after that, no, it went in a completely different direction to what I was expecting. Like, a lot of conflicted emotions are happening at the end of this one, and I cannot wait to see how. I think it's like a fine line of like what will actually satisfy me. I think there needs to be enough like back and forth and pulling of conflict and loyalties and stuff, but I'm so fascinated to see where it goes. And also, because it's the start of a series, where are we going in the big picture here? I hope it like builds as the series goes on. I hope it's not just like independent problems that we're trying to fix. However, I think the writing was quick and easy. It was absorbing. I just don't think it's like beautifully complexly written thing I've ever read. It could be pretty cliched at times, and particularly there she is, which was cute at first. Don't get me wrong, I rolled my eyes a couple of times, but he just said it so many times, especially like towards the end. I was like, there she is. Went from like kind of cheesy and sweet to like out loud, laugh out loud, shut up. And then again, very similar to Fourth Wing, the world is interesting, the political landscape is interesting. Feels like it's just missing a little, it needs to be filled in a little bit. You know how hairdressers don't dye blonde hair black, they'll put like a filler color in between to like add some warmth and texture. It's missing that warmth and texture. Like, the political landscape is interesting. We have different kinds of vampires going on, like 3 different clans, and then even within that we have 2 different types of vampires, like down to their wings. And we have the gods. It just feels like there's something else we're missing, and I think like the world needs to be broadened. We need to know what's going on in other places and start connecting those dots, and I'm hoping that's going to be what like ties the series together and what happens over time. Its only fault is that it's like just not the strongest thing I've ever read, but again, I wasn't expecting it to be, so that's fine. I had a blast. I enjoyed it kind of as much as I thought I was pleasantly surprised. I enjoyed it a little bit more than I thought I would. I cannot wait to read the second book. I'm definitely going to get to it this year. And then lastly, as promised, we have The Empire of God by S.A. Chakraborty. I listened to the little book of this one as well. This is the last book in the David Bad trilogy. I feel like you can kind of gather from my thoughts on the Kingdom of Copper, like my thoughts on this series overall. I think it was like, she's thick. She's really thick. She's over 700 pages, and I just don't think she needed to be. Because it's like a political leaning fantasy, it is a lot of like people, again, talking, figuring things out. There is some adventure in this one. I don't know, it just, especially in the middle, I found it to be quite slow. Like, all of the action was with like a certain camp of characters and not so much the other ones. I just think that could have been chopped up a little bit. I think the end could have been slowed down and the middle could have been quickened. I don't know, I started to really feel the length. Part of me like thinks it's the strongest of the series. It strikes the balance the best between like that adventure side and the political landscape, but things are broadened out more in this one. We have more going on. Just think I enjoyed the second one the best. I liked that political landscape. I liked the complicated characters, and because a lot of our characters are split up, it's war times, things are really hard in this one. We didn't have that funness, which again is to be expected in the last book, but I think that's just why I prefer the second one a little bit more. I've had to change and start recording on my phone. My camera is just not playing ball. We've been in a fight for some time. The reason I was so stressed with Kingdom of Copper was because of the Dara sections. This book was really hard on Dara, and therefore it was also really hard on me. It was so difficult to read, and especially like being in his perspective and knowing all the things that he knows and everything that's happened to him. And I don't think anyone really appreciates what happened to him in his past. I would give anything for a spin-off, even just a book on Dara. And I know there's like The River of Silver, there's like a spin-off collection of stories, so I'm really like crossing my fingers that there's one of Dara in there. I mean, the end of this one is actually a little more open-ended than some YA fantasy series I've read. Not in a bad way though, but I am really intrigued about this short story collection and to see if there's a couple things that we can just, you know, have set in stone. I would really like a couple things to be set in stone. I'm kind of really hoping that like the characters in this one end up cropping up in the adventures of Amina al-Sarafi. I can't remember which takes place first. I hope this one. I hope these characters crop up older and like more naughty than ever. And those were the books that I read in September. I'd love to hear what you read in September. If you've read any of these books and you have any thoughts or opinions, please let me know in the comment section. But other than that, that is all I have for this video. I hope you have an amazing morning, afternoon, evening / night. My name's Jade. I hope I see you again next time. Goodbye!